and you may find yourself reading the autobiography of a famous drummer, and you may say to yourself, why did he write this? 3 main reasons. Chris Frantz's autobiography is, of course, famously, or was, of course, famously, and may again be, the drummer for Talking Heads, and also is instrumental in the Tom Tom Club and lots of other production jobs. Yeah, Chris Frantz wrote this. He is the drummer with Talking Heads, though. That's what he's most famous for. And the book, written in 2020, has 3 reasons for the autobiography on the front. Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club, Tina. Let's do the last one first, because last but by no means least here, because he's been married, Chris has been married to Tina Weymouth for 40 years. The book's called Remain in Love. They do. And throughout this book, it is clear how much he admires the woman, how much he reveres her, and how he still really is in love with her. It's beautifully done, and it's never sort of achingly, oh my word, and I gave her a rose, and we had rose petals and all, Never like that. It's just a love of the person and an admiration of the person and the artistry and all of that. That is a lovely part of the book. The book's also, though, as people will want to see, quite a lengthy discourse or recollection on early childhood and also going to college and meeting Tina and meeting or forming a band, Tina and Chris, in Chris's recollection. Now, history is generally written by the winners, and in this situation, I'd say that is the case, but there has to be a corollary and a caveat to that. Oh, both a corollary and a caveat. Yes, more of that in a minute. But they really, in Chris's recollection, formed the band and asked their friend David Byrne to join. Jerry Harrison joined a while later. And most of this book is about the first albums, or the lion's share of the albums up to us. I'm just scratching my ear then, it was a bit itchy. Up to the live album, Stop Making Sense, which was so massive, and also live concert film. Jonathan Demme directing. It's a great piece of work. And the latter part of the book, which covers the albums from Little Creatures through to Naked, very short. And there's a reason for that. More of this in a minute. But it is, this book, absolutely necessary if you're a fan of musical production, if you're a fan of the kind of music that Talking Heads produced. Chris Frantz is called a rock drummer. He isn't. He's a drummer he's a great drummer, but there are polyrhythms there, and there's all sorts of reggae and all sorts of that kind of influence. And he plays funk and he plays soul and he plays all sorts, and he's a great drummer. So, people say John Bonham, great drummer, great rock drummer. But if you can play all sorts of different styles, different matter entirely. Now, not that I don't like John Bonham, love his work. It's absolutely fascinating to look at the way that the albums came to fruition and the way that they were a big hit live at CBGB's before they got an offer, and they got an offer from Seymour Stein at Sire, and most bands would have gone yes please, but they realised that when they made their demos, they realised they weren't ready, so they said let's go away a bit and then come back. And fortunately for them, Seymour Stein was still there and gave them a good deal. So that first album, 77, is really delved into, and the way they worked through all of that is delved into. And that also is Fear of Music and well, the name of the more songs about buildings and food, and then the fear of music, are also delved into the way that the music is made, but particularly the important thing, certainly for the next couple of albums, Remaining Light and Speaking in Tongues, is the way that, according to Chris Frantz, they jammed together at he and Tina's loft apartment most of the time. They then recorded all that on Chris's boombox and went away and produced the songs from there. That's really important to hold on to. It was, according to Chris Frantz, a collaborative thing. Hold on to that. There's also lots of lovely information about Compass Point and working there with Chris Blackwell and great engineers there and great producers there, and talking and being friendly with Robert Palmer, who comes across very beautifully, and working with Lee Scratch Perry and working with Sly and Robbie. These stories are fantastic, and also in their production late on in the book, because they did an awful lot of great production work, Tina and Chris, working with the Happy Mondays for Yes Please, their disregarded second album, which I rather like. But you'll have to have a look at that. It is a story that that does chime with the stuff I've heard regarding drug use and all the rest of it, and behaviour and all of that. It's great to read. And throughout, Chris Frantz has a really unassuming but really caring quality. He really cares about the music. He cares about his wife. He cares about the band. When they did Tom Tom Club, let's talk about that for a while, because in his view, David Byrne wanted to make an album with Brian Eno. More about Brian in a minute. Which would be My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, wouldn't it? I think that's the one, if I remember rightly. I could go back and check, but I can't be bothered. So Jerry Harrison said, I'll make my own album. And because they've been touring extensively, they were told, you've got to do something. Tina and Chris told, you've got to do something. You've only got $2,000 in the bank. Because, as they said, it takes money to keep this band going. And also keep in your mind, while you're thinking about the collaborative artistic situation, they all put equal amounts of money into the production. They never said according to Chris, they never said to their record company, to Seymour Stein, to Sire, or to their management, Gary Kurfürst, would you put the money up? It's an advance. Would you put the money up? They always paid for their production themselves, and they put the money up 4 quarters. So as he points out in the book, Chris and Tina put in 50%. Okay, keep that in your mind. So Tom Tom Club become incredibly popular, more popular than the Talking Heads ever have been. And there is a story that he tells where, Wordy Rapping Hood's huge. They did that first. Seymour Stein said, show me what you got. And then maybe, it's Chris Blackwell actually, said, do a track at Compass Point, which is where in Nassau, which is where an awful lot of their work goes on. They love it there. So bring me a single, and then we'll have a look at what we got. Well, they brought in Wordy Rapping Hood. It was put out, and that was, they knew in the early 80s what was making people dance. They went to clubs, so they produced that. It became a hit, and Chris Blackwell said, can I have, like the Happy Mondays did? Yes, please. I'd like an album. And it became incredibly popular. That first album became incredibly popular. And there's a story that he tells that they were told when they were in a taxi going to, I think, it's some band business anyway, with David Byrne in the taxi. They were told the album's gone, I think it was gold. And it was the wrong time to do it because they couldn't celebrate because David Byrne just turned his head and looked out the window. That, let's get to this point now, is an issue. It's an issue that Chris Frantz wants to put right. He mentions early on that David Byrne had a painting when they were at college, had a painting. He's part of several painting exhibition. And the allegation is that, and it's an allegation, bound to be, that David Byrne, when everybody had gone home, went back and rearranged all of the paintings to put all of his paintings in the entranceway. So they were the first things that you saw when you went in. It looked like his show rather than anybody else's. So this is something which is regularly mentioned by Chris Frantz. He doesn't like the way that he feels denigrated by David Byrne, who is taking credit for songs that actually were created by all four members in a jam situation. Certainly, I think it's in Remaining Light. They'd agreed that they would all have an equal credit. And then when the album came out, it was written on the inner sleeve something like all songs by David Byrne and Brian Eno, something like that. But certainly, I won't paraphrase it too much because I'm sure I'll get it wrong. So something that didn't show that they were all involved in it. And he has a real problem with David Byrne making out that it's his band. Now, people made that out anyway for themselves because it's a headline, isn't it? And if someone's at the front and they're a certain character, as David Byrne is, and he's got charisma, you're going to think it's his band, aren't you? But it ain't. And I never thought that, actually, but other people definitely did. And there is a time when they go to Japan. I think Remaining Light might have just come out. I think it was. And I think Tina and Chris were interviewed together. I think Jerry Harrison was interviewed separately, and so was David Byrne. And the first thing that Chris and Tina asked are, what are you going to do now that David's leaving the band? They did not know. So there's all of that going on. He covers the story with a kind of coquettishness about the item apparently, allegedly, left in the bed at the hotel. If you don't know that story, put it in a search engine. There are lots of that out there. Google's one, but there are others. Have a look at that, and then that will give you a bit of extra learning. So he has a real issue. He never pushes. It's a little bit bitter, to be honest, but if what he says has veracity, I can understand why. He never at any point says, well, Tom Tom Club did a lot better than Talking Heads ever did, because Talking Heads, he's very clear, are his number one band and his number one priority. So the latter part of the book, it's as if he spent a lot of time on those albums, and the latter part of those albums, which cover Little Creatures, they cover True Stories, 2 albums of the True Stories film that David Byrne wanted so much to make and did, and then Naked. They're a very slim period, and I think I know why. We all got together, and we all jammed together. Oh, by the way, Brian Eno doesn't come out of this book very well. He works with David Byrne, of course, after working with Talking Heads, with him in Talking Heads. And Chris Frantz is laudatory about his early work with them and his work in the studio. Not very laudatory about his behaviour. I won't say any more than that, but it's quite interesting, actually. Anyway, the last albums go from... The reason why I said that is because when they were jamming, speaking in tongues, both David Byrne and Brian Eno had said they didn't want to work with Talking Heads anymore. And what Chris did, they said, what we're going to do? So they got into the loft and they started jamming, and Chris phoned Brian Eno and said, we're jamming and we'd like you down here. And he said, well, I'm not a musician. They said, we don't mind. We're not commenting on that. And he turned up. He got there, played with them a bit. They let that happen, and then they phoned David Byrne. Brian's here and we're doing loads of jamming. Would you like to? I'll be right there. So that's how that album came out. It's that kind of situation. The last albums are not a jam-based, here's how the music happens. He just mentions it. He doesn't make a lot of it, but it's clear David Byrne turned up with songs. It's the first time that's happened, really. Turned up with songs and they played them. So that's why the last bit of the book, I believe, is shorter, because they're not his songs. And it's all about making the music with him, and he couldn't do that. There is nothing in here about No Talking Just Head, which was an Ambassador album, wasn't it? And don't think I've ever heard it. I think I need to have a listen to that. But it's a beautiful, poignant, and also very bitter book. Not very bitter, but quite bitter book. I can understand why. It is a great read. If you love the band, you have to read it. It's 3 years old now, 4 years old actually. But the band aren't going anywhere, are they? They're kind of in aspic now because that's done. And he is a great drummer, a fantastic drummer, and also seemingly a very lovely bloke. Ta-ta.